All right, so just my face this time. Hopefully I'll be able to deal with that. A few preliminary remarks are that this show is pointless. Believe it or not, I actually don't like just simply hating on things, which might be unbelievable considering the fact that pretty much every single video on this channel at this point, except for the couple ones that Siegfried did where he told stories, they're all criticisms, like negative critiques. But believe it or not, I actually do like to enjoy things. I hope one day to just create a video on something where I just enjoy talk about how much I enjoy the entire thing. But this thing, I can now say, after having seen all 8 episodes at least 1.5, if not 2 to 3 times, this thing has no artistic merit whatsoever. And that in and of itself isn't as weird to me as much as the fact that there are lots of people who do think that it has artistic merit. Now, obviously, Amazon doesn't care about artistic merit. That's just par for the course when it comes to something like Amazon. Amazon doesn't care about art. They care about making money. And maybe they care about destroying the institutions which are preventing them from making more money or something like that. But the point is that Amazon obviously doesn't care about the artistic value of the Rings of Power, but Payne and McKay certainly do. And it's become clear as I've read several interviews from them and watched that they genuinely believe that they've created something worthwhile here. And the funny thing about that is that I'm even having confusion with them. I'm still trying to figure out why they think that. Furthermore, there's this strange syndrome of random people on Twitter and other social media devices just sort of proclaiming, I watched The Rings of Power and I didn't think it was that bad. And it's like, okay, why? What was it about the show that you liked? I remember someone mentioned the dialogue, which how am I even supposed to engage with someone like that? Someone who looks at the Rings of Power dialogue and says, yes, that, I want it. That is good dialogue right there. That is the type of dialogue I think represents good writing. And so, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, the show, to use Nerdotic's term, is an unmitigated disaster. And because of this, I don't really see a point in doing another line-by-line review, at least not in the context of this series. And so now that the whole thing is over, I'd like to sort of give some more general thoughts on how Season 8 kind of affects the rest of the season. I know I've sort of been veering away from the scene-by-scene sort of reviews ever since Episode 6, where in Episode 6, I kind of just blew through the entirety of the battle scene and the setup to it because ultimately it didn't matter. The only thing that really was important for that video was Mount Doom erupting at the end. Now, there was one decision in that episode which was important, namely Theo's decision to save his mother's life in order by giving the sword hilt to Adar, which ended up ruining the Southlands. Which is fine. That's fine as a decision. The problem was more around the context of it, but at the same time, it was such a minute point in the grand scheme of the episode that I even just decided not to include it. I don't think I had talked about how that was even a decision at all because it was just so unnecessary. It's not even that it was unnecessary. It's just that it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant to the overall quality of the episode. Similarly, with Episode 7, it was another thing where the whole episode was so boring and so pointless. Like, what happened in Episode 7? In Episode 7, people get out of the of Mordor. Galadriel gives Theo a sword, and says that one day he'll be able to be a soldier or something. And then Halbrand and Galadriel ride off to I guess it's Eregion. I think I said Linden at some point. Point is that they ride off to the elves. Then what happens with the Dwarvish plot? Well, Durin's thing gets stripped. His crest. Okay? Like, it just sort of continues to set up this animosity between the elves and the dwarves, and specifically Durin and his father. But it does so in a way that doesn't really affect anything else. Like, Elrond has the mithril ore at the beginning of the episode, and then he has the mithril ore again at the end of the episode, and then in this episode, that's what they use to make the 3 rings. So what was the point? What was the point of the entire Dwarvish plot other than some reveals about, oh, mithril actually does work when it comes to restoring the elves, and there's a Balrog there. I guess we kind of had stuff with Nori. Like, funnily enough, the Harfoot plot in episode 7 was almost the only thing that actually happened in that entire episode, which isn't good. It's not good when the vast majority of your episode is composed of things not happening, especially when that is episode 7. I'm having a similar problem with this episode as well. I don't even really know what to say, because in order to talk about the show, I need to rationalize it. I need to make sense of what is on screen. But when you have a show like Rings of Power, it becomes excessively difficult to do that. Now, I wanted to briefly talk about some of the good stuff, because I want to add some more contrast with my reviews. I usually don't talk about the good stuff in this sort of thing. So Miriel and Elendil's conversation, for the most part, outside of like the very beginning, was good. And I think that it plays off of how both of their characters have been established throughout the season. Elendil being sort of the reluctant faithful, you could say. And then this is further challenged by the loss of his son on the behest of Galadriel. I think that works in a limited sense. I don't think that it should be something that Elendil is doing. That just seems wrong. But their conversation, I think, works. You have both of them, they're sort of relating to each other in terms of how much they've lost from this little expedition and how to move forward. They're both rationalizing how to move forward. And the interesting thing about it is that throughout the show, the writers have employed archaisms, especially when elves and to some degree when Númenóreans are talking, which in and of itself kind of makes sense. What didn't make sense was the words was like the sentences that they were saying. But in this conversation, it was fairly coherent. Like I was able to follow the conversation pretty well. They were using archaisms, but they actually sounded like things that people say. I have no problem with people using archaic language, especially in a poetic context, or when you're trying to emphasize a certain group of people as being more noble. Nobility can often employ archaic language as a means of distinguishing themselves from commoners, and so that makes sense to me. The actual forging of the rings, like the way that they portrayed it, was actually pretty decent. The way they basically did it is they created 3 sets of metal bands in like a specific shape, and then they sort of they heated up, and then they sort of twisted and arranged the metal until it created a sort of ring shape, and then they had little like claws to attach the gems. Side comment though, the scene as a whole doesn't really make sense, and the setup and payoff don't really make sense, but I just wanted to talk about the forging. However, I did want to say, I have no idea why the like sapphire, ruby, and I guess it was an emerald, I think. I forget what the other one is because I'm not a real Tolkien fan. They weren't polished or cut in any, like they just looked like regular gems, and I just think that that's a weird thing to do, and also doesn't make sense considering how much money they have for their budget. There's the ending shot of, well, Halbrand looking over Mordor. In case you didn't know already, they did reveal that Halbrand is indeed Sauron, just like many were speculating, and just like the leaks said. Yay. The shot is actually, I think it looks pretty nice, in all honesty, and there's there's something along the lines of an interesting thing that they do where it zooms in on the eye. That's how the shot begins, which sort of has the implication of the eye of Sauron to it. And then it sort of zooms out and you get to see the whole of Mordor. And admittedly, it looks a lot like Peter Jackson's Mordor. But the thing is that Peter Jackson's Mordor is actually pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. It's a great depiction. And so it to me, I actually liked the way the shot looked. I thought it was, it had a similar feeling to the closing shot from Two Towers when the camera sort of pans up, showing how tall the mountains are. Then you get to see the vast breadth of Mordor and the Darkland that they're trying to get into. Gil-galad shows an act of humility. He shows a little bit of humility, which is great because that has not really happened yet. Like when he's offered the crown as a means of being the one to have all like the power to restore the elves and stuff like that, he's like, no one should have that power. And when they say, well, not just anyone, we're not just thinking about giving it to anyone, we're thinking about giving it specifically to you. And he says, that is very dangerous. And I liked that. That sounds like something that the actual Gil-galad would say. Let's see. The show ended. That was pretty good. The ending itself wasn't that great, especially the credit scene. But the fact that it ended was a huge lift off my shoulders, honestly. Yeah, I think that's it. I'm going to be honest, I actually kind of went in excited. I was kind of excited to see this episode for a couple of reasons. One, I did just want it to be over, but also I had seen what everyone was talking about on Twitter the entire day, and I can't watch it in the morning because I have to go to work. But I remember watching it, and I was thinking, all this crap is going to happen, and it's going to be so much fun to watch. And so I was so excited to see it. But no, it was boring again. I was so disappointed. I thought so here's the thing. I thought it was going to be like episode 6, where I was just, it was entertainingly bad. But no, it was just, there were certain points, like the argument between Sauron, I'm just going to call him Sauron from now on, and Galadriel on the raft when he invades her mind or whatever. That was actually pretty funny. Just, I mean, who shot that? And then who edited it? And both of them were like, this is good. We like this. We want to include this in our $60 million an episode budget. That's what we want. That's what we're going with. And like Sauron's eyes turn into like lizard eyes during it, and they do this dumb voice change thing. It would have been, I don't know what they should have done. I think what would have been better at the very least is if they just simply did, you can have a voice changer, but don't just like make him sound more angry. Make his voice sound more like distortedly deeper. I don't exactly know if that would work either. I'd have to hear it in order to tell, but the point is that it was just goofy looking at it. Speaking of which, Halbrand is a different character this episode. And I know what you're thinking. I'm talking about the whole Sauron thing. No, I'm actually not talking about the whole Sauron thing. That's a different issue, which I will deal with a little bit later. No, Halbrand is not the same character in episode 8 as he was in episodes 1 through 7. Well, 2 through 7. He's more extroverted, he's more unrestrained in his speech and with talking to people, and he has a very sort of carousing attitude, and he's very flattering, and he has this sort of I'm just here to help sort of persona, which we kind of see a little bit of that when he's carousing with the Númenóreans back in like episode 3 or something like that. But no, it's far worse in this episode. And the thing is that I know some people are going to say, well, that's because of the fact that the show is really trying to build towards the reveal that he's Sauron. He's letting his persona slip or things like that. The problem I have with that is that that's not how Sauron acts, even. But more importantly, the show doesn't treat that as a slip up. The show is completely unaware of the fact that no, he shouldn't be acting this way. It's not like this has been his character arc, that he's been learning to be more restrained or anything like that. And so this is just the end of that whole character. No, the show treats it like this is just who Halbrand is. This is just how he's always acted, which isn't true. It might not be like the most blatant thing. It's maybe a little bit more subtle than what I'm implying. But the point is that that's not how he behaves. And that's not how he should be behaving. What actually is the slip up is the fact that he talks about the seen versus unseen world, and the whole thing with like creating a power not of the flesh but over flesh. And Celebrimbor sort of repeats those words in Galadriel's presence, and Galadriel thinks, oh, wait, that sounds exactly like what Adar was saying last episode, and that's what we were talking about with Todd in the beginning of the season in episode 1, where he says something along the lines of, it looks as if the orcs were attempting to meddle with the unseen world. And so the slip up is just the fact that he goes back to doing what he did before, I guess. Now realizing that he can do it with the help of the elves, which I'll actually get to in a minute. And then that leads Galadriel to investigate the line of kings of the Southlands. And then she realizes that the line of kings of the Southlands died off 1,000 years ago. First off, that's not how kingdoms work. I know that's how Gondor works, because Gondor is a Númenorian kingdom in exile, and so only a Númenor, like a true Númenorian noble king descended from the line of Elendil, is able to claim the throne. But normal kingdoms don't work like that, where you can just have them exist. The line completely dies off somehow, and there's no succession law or whatever, and then just nothing. And while we're on this topic, where did Halbrand get the crest of the king? He says he took it off a dead man. Did he get it from some guy's grave from 1,000 years ago? How is that even? Why did he do that? If he's Sauron, why did he do that? How did he do that? Where did he find this grave? Are there just graveyards and you have last king of the Southlands marked out? Shouldn't the elves like Arendir and the other elves in the Southlands who are watching over these people, shouldn't they have known about this? Why didn't Arendir say something about the fact that, these people don't have a king? The whole line was broken. How is this? So, to get to the main topic of the video, and I'm sure the reason for why everyone clicked on this, if anyone clicks on this at all, I recognize and respect all of my lovely subscribers who watch all of my videos. I'm very thankful. Sorry. Halbrand is Sauron. Turns out Halbrand is Sauron, and no. We learned that was the case from the leak before episode 1 even aired, and the funny thing about that is that everyone who saw that leak started just assuming that Halbrand was Sauron, and so they were trying to come up with all the different ways in which that could be revealed. So they were thinking maybe Sauron is on the raft to ingratiate himself to Galadriel after she jumps the ship. Not sure how he would have figured out that she jumped the ship, but let's just ignore that for the sake of argument. Maybe he was the one who corrupted the tree in Lindon in order to convince the elves that that Mithril will restore their light, and maybe he was the one who sort of spread the rumor. This is a 500-year plan or something like that. And he's trying to get them to gather the Mithril together because Sauron really wants Mithril because it's a great metal and stuff like that. Another one is that the reason for why he wanted to be a blacksmith and to go to Numenor, which he didn't want to do, but let's just ignore that. The reason for why he wanted to be a blacksmith was because that was his manner of sort of working his way up until he could finally get to Pharazôn and Miriel, or their successors, and take control of Numenor, or something like that. And there were a bunch of others. All of them had a ton of problems. They were contradicted at several points by the show. None of them really made that much sense in the first place. And furthermore, they all had irreconcilable issues just all throughout, which basically made them impossible. Every single one of them were all better than what we actually got in the show. What was Sauron even trying to do in this show? There are sort of... Okay, so it seems like the whole corruption thing and like the fading of the elves and stuff like that, that's just a de facto aspect of the world. Like the world is a clock, is like a sort of winding clock where you wind it up and you just let it play, and then it eventually just begins to deteriorate until it just stops working. And so what the show sort of implies that he was trying to do is that he's like trying to fix these problems, that Sauron is actually like a good guy after Morgoth's death. But then due to a variety of factors like Adar slicing him in half and maybe forcing him to change forms and stuff like that, I still don't understand what Sauron's trying to do, because he's not good. Like, he's, even in the show's terms, he's still not good. In the conversation between him and Galadriel, it's clear that he still believes that domination over others is the only way to do anything. And I know that the show, and I know that the showrunners in particular, want us to sort of view Halbrand almost in a tragic light. Like, we want to, they want us to like the character. They want us to like the character and sort of be sad at the fact that he's Sauron or something like that. Or maybe it's like a huge twist and I never saw it coming. The thing is that I didn't like Halbrand ever. Along with everyone else, he's an awful person. And again, that's not inherently a problem. You can have awful characters, and you can even have awful characters that the audience really likes. But when everyone's just an awful character and you're doing nothing to address how awful of a character they are, either that has to be like the point of the show, you're just watching awful people, or it just doesn't work. I don't know really how else I can explain it. But yeah, Sauron is apparently trying to do something with the seen versus unseen worlds. And the thing is that I really wanted them to explain what the seen and unseen worlds are, or the seen and unseen world are. What is the unseen world? I guess it has something to do with like the soul. Is that where Frodo goes when he puts on the ring? Is that the unseen world? Is that what we're talking about here? I don't know, because the show hasn't given me any context. The unseen world is like just a thing that apparently is, and it has something to do with the Rings of Power. Apparently the Rings of Power offer control over the unseen world. Does that just mean that it will stop people's like souls from fading away? Does it affect the physical world at all? Like, this isn't a concept that Tolkien really ever talked about. Like, I don't think that the concept of unseen world doesn't show up in his stories. If it does, it's so sparse that it might as well not. And so I don't understand what they're even doing here, because this isn't like a Tolkienian concept. And even if it was, the show doesn't tell us anything. We have no information to go on. And I don't even know what to say here. Like, I don't know what the point of any of this was, because it seems like this huge concept, this thing that they were ordering the entire season around. It doesn't mean anything for all intents, as far as the audience is concerned. It doesn't mean anything. If it does mean the whole thing with the immortal souls, then I still have a problem with that. I was hoping, I remember in like episode 7, I was kind of hoping that we would get a deconfirmation of like the Balrog and elf myth with the Silmaril inside the tree. If anything, it just solidified it more. I kind of wanted Coriolson's interpretation to be true, even though I knew it wouldn't be. Why are the elves going to lose their immortal soul? Why? Like, the show does nothing to explain it. There just is corruption. There just is a gradual fading of the elves, like physically. Like there's a bodily and like spiritual fading where the elves themselves are literally becoming less real, or something along those lines. And if they don't get to Valinor by spring, or by mid-spring maybe, that apparently that's the time limit. They had a good 20,000, the Dark Elves had a good 20,000 year span in Middle Earth, let's say, without the light of the Valar. But spring this year, that's what's going to cause the death of all the elves. And I have no idea why the Noldor, nothing makes sense, because they don't do anything to explain it. The elves contextually don't make any sense in this show. They are different from the books. They're different from the elves that Tolkien wrote. Fundamentally, they are not the same. Metaphysically, they aren't the same creatures. And also, more importantly, they do call them their immortal souls. I don't think that your soul is immortal if it's going to fade away if you don't get enough vitamin V. So, Celebrimbor, the greatest elven smith alive, one of the greatest elven smiths to have ever lived, needs Sauron to explain to him the concept of an alloy. And then suddenly they're like, yes, we can combine the mithril with other metals. Who would have thought? What am I even watching? What was I watching? Like, was this all a practical joke? When I see something like that, I have to wonder if it's just a practical joke, because none of Halbrand's advice that we see on screen is something, none of it is anything that Celebrimbor shouldn't already know. Everything that Halbrand says on screen is stuff that Celebrimbor should have learned when he was 12. Like, Elvish 12, I mean. So I guess I've kind of beaten around the bush here a little bit. We get the Halbrand is Sauron reveal. So to talk about the actual, like, the Sauron reveal itself, it's really bad. And I guess something that I was going to talk about earlier, but then forgot about it for a second. The show makes less sense with Halbrand as Sauron. The show already doesn't make sense, but many of the scenes with Halbrand become meaningless if you have it in your mind, especially now that we've seen the end of the show. But if you've seen everything that's going on, why Halbrand was on that raft with other people, why he was sailing into the West in the first place, like why he was running away even to a certain degree and stuff like that. Most of all, why was he looking at the crest all night? Like, no one was around. It wasn't for a show. He's looking at the crest as if it has like real meaning to him, as if the crest is actually some symbol about him and something like that. And he's contemplating what he needs to do with it. What am I even supposed to get out of that scene with the knowledge that he is Sauron? The whole series, Halbrand as a character, doesn't make sense if he's Sauron. There are way too many things where the character only makes sense if you believe that he is the heir to the Southlands. I don't understand how Halbrand or Sauron is able to like just simply invade the minds of anyone, like especially an elf, and especially an elf as powerful as Galadriel. The fact that he's able to just sort of get in her head and, you know, like just show her whatever he wants. Why do the showrunners think that he would be able to do that? It's not like he has the One Ring. It's not like he is all powerful or that he has this omnipotence within a certain range or stuff like that. But I will say, funnily enough, it seems like they got rid of Celeborn. I was complaining about that last video. It seems like they got rid of Celeborn for the specific purpose of making it so that Galadriel has to have a decision of whether or not she wants to align herself with Sauron and become his queen. And that was admittedly, that whole scene was one where I couldn't stop laughing, so I might have missed something. The only thing that I can think of that though is that, like, we already know what decision Galadriel is going to make, partially because, again, this is a prequel. This isn't even a meaningful decision for her. There isn't any growth that she goes through in making this decision. I think that's the thing that the showrunners don't understand, is that it's not the fact that characters make a decision, it's how that decision affects them, like as a person, and affects the world around them. Galadriel's decision doesn't mean anything other than the fact that, like, if she made it, she might not be there to convince the Elven Smiths to make 3 rings. But what? Like, is just Sauron going to become a good guy? Is Galadriel going to become a bad guy? They're both already evil. What does it matter, even? And also, I will say, I was thinking about the fact that, like, Celeborn is going to come back at some point, and he's going to be wondering why there seems to have been a romantic pairing between Elrond, Elendil, and Sauron throughout this first season. Look, if you want to make it so that Celeborn does exist and that he's already married to Galadriel, that's fine. But like that he's lost, that's fine to a certain degree. I don't like it, but it's not inherently wrong. But like, don't make it so that she keeps like having the, ooh, he's so handsome, I think I'm going to fall in love with him eyes every single male character she interacts with. Maybe not everyone, but like most of the male characters. Season 2 is apparently going to be Sauron's season. Why? Like, okay, so I read an interview between Payne and McKay where they're talking about how they wanted to make Sauron an actual character, like a sympathetic character. And they wanted to sort of his story to be like a tragic decline into greater and greater evil until he's the kind of person that we see in Lord of the Rings. The problem is, no, that's not how that works. That's not how that should work either. But more importantly, if they wanted to make Sauron a sympathetic character, they failed. Because not only is Halbrand not a sympathetic character, he's not a character. He's barely a character. We don't know anything about him. We don't know what his real desires are. I sort of alluded to this. In the episode 5 review. We have no idea what his desires, his personal struggles are. As of episode 5, we didn't know what was the evil that he did in the Southlands, like what he needed to do to survive and stuff like that. He's not a character, and because of that, it doesn't matter if there's a twist ending and he's actually the main antagonist of the entire show. That doesn't mean anything. It would have been just as meaningful if you revealed that Sauron was none of the people that you thought it was. And so I don't understand why they even went this route. Well, I guess I do. It's because they're stupid, but that's a different issue. But on the topic of season 2 being Sauron's story or something like that, apparently this season was supposed to be Galadriel's story. But I have a question. What story arc did Galadriel go through in this show? Because I honestly didn't notice one. You do have the setup of a story arc. You have her hatred and impatience sort of being set up in episodes 4 and 5. There was material. So in other words, there was material for a story arc. There was material from, you have a character who is awful, and she gradually turns into someone who is noble, respectable, dignified, and things like that. The problem is she didn't go through that. She does become more reasonable and respectable and level-headed at the end of the show, but that's not because of the decisions and the events that happened to, around, and from her. Like, she didn't make a decision to become more reasonable and respectable. That just happened. She didn't make a decision to not rush bullheaded into everything. That just happened. And also, she does kind of rush still bullheaded into everything, because even at the end of the show, it's not like she's really changed. She maybe puts on a better facade, maybe, but like, she still screeches at Halbrand and has the most stubborn attitude out of anyone in the show. And so no, what do you mean that this is Galadriel's story? I think I understand her character, but her character has been stagnant for the vast majority of the season. And what's worse is that her character has been stagnant in being awful, being one of the most unlikable protagonists that I think anyone's ever actually seen. And this is one of those things where, like, people say that they like the show. What do you like about Galadriel? Do you like the fact that she wears armor? Is that what it is? Do you like her dialogue? I would have a hard time believing that. Do you like the fact that she's stubborn? You see, I think that a lot of the times people have this conception of what a good story, of what is good or bad. Like, for instance, it's good for you to have representation in a show, and therefore if a show has representation, it's a good show. Or it's good for characters to have flaws, therefore if a character has flaws, they are a good character. But that's just simply not how stories work. That's not how storytelling works in general. You can't just simply put flaws on a character and suddenly that character becomes a good character. Those flaws have to be meaningful. They have to be organic. Like, for instance, if someone is a banker, it makes sense for them to be greedy. Makes sense for them to be overly obsessed with increasing their wealth, and they could even be cruel if that's sort of if that's related to them. Similarly, you could have a banker who really tries, well, let's not use a banking example again. You could have a soldier. A soldier could be very sexually immoral because of the fact that that's one of the only enjoyments that he's able to get in sort of wartime and war, like a war life state. He might have other virtues which sort of balance it out, but he could have those problems. But if you made a soldier who has no reason to be, say, like messy or particularly stubborn, or like all of his other character traits and all the other situations which he's been in throughout his life, and his otherwise personality, or his personality otherwise, all those things sort of contradict the sort of intemperate, stubborn, and disorganized person that he is. That doesn't make him a good character. And it's a similar thing with Galadriel. I can't confirm this. I'd have to talk to these people, but I have a feeling that when people look at Galadriel, they think, oh, well, she's a complex character. She's a complex character because she has all these flaws. But that doesn't make her a complex character. That, at best, it makes her a dynamic character, that she is the protagonist, but she has issues and stuff like that. But those don't really contribute to the story other than just the simple fact of her running face first into everything ends up forwarding the plot. And sometimes it doesn't even do that. And so I don't even understand how this is supposed to be a compelling character or a compelling story. And I especially don't understand why this is considered to be Galadriel's season. Because if it is, then the showrunners have completely wasted 8 hours of everyone's time with a story which isn't good and which completely squanders apparently the main character of the story. And they say that it's, like I said earlier, they say that season 2 is going to be Sauron's season, and I'm just thinking, are you guys gonna do the same thing that you did with Galadriel last season? Because if so, no, thank you. You could not pay me to watch season 2 of The Rings of Power, by the way. Unfortunately, Jon didn't die. I'm just going to call him Waldrake if I ever refer to him again. I was kind of disappointed with that. Everyone else that I named pretty much died or left the show, with Todd on the first episode. I really wanted Jon to die just because of the fact that I wanted consistency. Admittedly, I did hate Kyle more, so I was glad that I actually don't remember like the guy I've been calling Kyle. I don't remember what his actual name is in the show. I remember Waldrig just because of the fact that his name gets shouted out at least once an episode, except for like episodes 7 and 8. Yeah. Let's see. There's something else I wanted to talk about. There's probably like 20 things that I could talk about, but this video has to end eventually. And this is more of a rant, admittedly, than an actual... Oh yeah, that's right. The credits, the ending sequence with some lady singing the Rings of Power epigraph at the beginning of each thing of Lord of the Rings. So it's funny, I remember reading Fellowship of the Ring after watching the Lord of the Rings movies the first time, and honestly, the epigraph was the first thing that really caught my attention and just sort of was a signal that the books were going to be so much more interesting and so much more have so much more depth than the movies did. So they decided to sing that because it's a great little poem, you could say. That was awful, like the singing. I don't want to harp on the singer because I don't know who she is, and so I don't even know if this is her fault. Her voice itself is actually fine. It's the notes and the arrangement that I have no idea how anyone listened to that and thought, that sounds good. In addition to this, it doesn't make sense having that poem be there. It doesn't make sense. For one, they screwed up the chronology. I know that they are not there for us. I know that it's that song isn't sort of in the context of the story. It's not as though an elf is saying that. Fair enough. Point is that it still doesn't really make sense because they screwed up the chronology, and so the three rings appear to be ontologically separate from the other rings, which is only like minutely true, but that's in the sense of that like Sauron doesn't have any part in their making. It has nothing to do with how different that they were made of mithril or that they were made for a different purpose. But more importantly, obviously the 7 and the 9 haven't been forged yet, but the 1 hasn't been forged yet. The One Ring hasn't been forged yet. The only part of the Rings of Power in the Rings of Power TV show is the 3 rings being forged at the very end of the season, and they don't even have an effect on anything yet. I don't understand why they included the Lord of the Rings epigraph. They didn't deserve it. There was nothing about this show which merited using that poem as sort of the way to capstone the season. And so, yeah, I need to wrap this up. I'm not done with this, obviously. In fact, I'm working with a friend on a project right now. I think you guys will enjoy it. We'll see. It's actually not that ambitious of an undertaking. I was going to say it's very ambitious. I think that you guys will enjoy it, but I don't want to spoil what it is until it like comes out. I have a Twitter account, so I mentioned that in the comment on the last video. I have a Twitter account. I'll link it in the description if you want to watch it. Yeah, watch it. If you want to go and follow me or something like that. And yeah, that's all for me. I'm done with the analysis of the show for a while, and Harald sounds like he's not going to be done on his video, which sounds like it's going to be like 2 hours long, but he says he's basically not going to be done with it for like at least a couple of months, so you'll be waiting for that. Anyway, have a good evening.